Tom Barrack, it's great to see you on CNBC. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
I want to kick off by asking you if you think there is any Democrat today who can beat Donald Trump in 2020.
I mean, I think the answer is of course, right? I mean, this world, every moment has new surprises. And I'm not a politician, and I don't want to go over my skis even thinking about it. But anything could happen. It's a very diverse group. I think every week is a new life for both Democrats and Republicans. The president had a very good week last week. The Democrats didn't have such a great week. But it's a long road. So as everybody gets into their swim lanes, it could be a horse race at the end of the day. So I like many of the candidates. Joe Biden is a class act. He's a superman. He's a very gentle touch. He has a lot of experience. Michael Bloomberg, nobody should count him out of the race. Strong, thoughtful, considered, powerful, experienced. A long shot for sure in Democratic circles. But as the other candidates start to winnow out, you never can tell what happens. And I think President Trump has done a great job. He has aligned his power base by producing great results for his constituency. But America's divided, as the world is divided. So it's never over till it's over.
Do you feel like it's his to lose, potentially?
I do right now. The incumbency always has an advantage, and again, this is my personal opinion, not as a businessman. And the accomplishments that he has put in place that keep the economy moving, which is the primary driver, full employment, better employment for every minority than there's ever been, the unwrapping of a regulatory environment that has both great admirers and some detractors, but it's really helped and influenced business. A first phase trade deal with China, renegotiated trade deal with Mexico and Canada, for his core on the hardcore immigration issues. But there's a lot of divisiveness at home. We in America, as in all countries, are fighting a battle between the have and the have-nots. Democracy, as we envisioned it, is eroding a bit. People aren't sure what do you substitute for it. Our educational system, our healthcare system, diversity, sustainability, are all issues, while I think everybody in the world is looking for a soft hand, just a timeout. How do we pause for a minute and take a breath?
Certainly when you look at the record of the president, as you mentioned, his work with minorities, jobs, the economy, a lot of things he doesn't actually get that much credit for, but at the same point he has at times a loose relationship with the truth and with facts. Do you think that over the long term is going to hurt the United States, not just in terms of reputationally, but the democratic process? Because the United States is supposed to be the shining city on a hill.
Look, I think the United States is the shining city on a hill. I mean, I'm a great product of a combination of Lebanese DNA, which is ancient civilizations and a beautiful and hardy culture that was lit up by the opportunity of America saying you can take a minority with nothing and allow them to achieve the American dream. And we're all products of that. You're a product of it. I'm a product of it. And as time goes on, it becomes more difficult. And I think the president's style is much different than the political cadence and calibration of what we're used to. The good news side of that is it's startling. So he gets things done in the world by being direct and not falling into the process of a bureaucracy.
That's gotten him in trouble at times.
It's gotten him in real trouble at times. And it's also, going to your question, for the long game, you need a support team. And that support team can help you a lot, in the backdrop of what your decisions are. I think what he's done amazingly is said, my job is change. I was sent here for change. I have an agenda which is not about power, which is not about money, which is not really aligned with the legacy political party because he wasn't. And so he's shocking it into a debate. And it's really the way that I look at it. Is I think overall it's good for America. I always joke with him saying the new mantra should be let's make America great and the world better. It would be a simple add-on. That is where he's going. It doesn't feel that way at times because we're all falling back into this environment where people on globalism are just confused. But I think in the long run, this is a good thing for America. It's a debate. As you know, it's divisive on both countries. My friends on both coasts go livid in the discussion. And I try and explain to them that in my humble opinion, just as a businessman, but as somebody who knows this president very well, that's the object of the drill.
Speaking of businessmen, I mean, you have a situation where you could potentially see Mike Bloomberg as the Democratic nominee, and then you have two successful businessmen going head-to-head. Is that good for America?
I don't know if it's bad for America. It's the system, right? That within the political bureaucracy itself, it's the opposite. So within the bowels of all the departments, and by the way, I have unbelievable respect for the bureaucracy. If it weren't for the bureaucracy, we'd be in real trouble because they keep everybody in line. But in order to be in that bureaucracy, you almost have to come from the bureaucracy. So a businessman or woman entering that environment hardly ever does well. Now, amazingly, at the top, if you take
you can call the shots, it's a bit different. No.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So I like Mike Bloomberg. I know him. I think he would be an amazing president. He was an amazing mayor. He's run a first-class business. He's smart. He's thoughtful. He's considered. He's done it all before. And again, he doesn't need anything. So in that sense, the idea of somebody self-funding a campaign, because at the end of the day, it's about money, right? It's about money in every country, in every election, America even more so. So I think it would be a great thing, and you have some young candidates coming up on the Democratic side who this cycle may not serve them well, but it'll eventually serve them well. But the system itself doesn't beget allowing these people to have a real career in just politics or governing.
Do you think impeachment was a mistake?
I don't know. I mean, I think it was harsh on everybody, especially on the president. He signed up for that. He took it unbelievably well. He's been investigated, impeached, harassed for 3 years. But that's the system. And I don't think the people who are on the other side are mean-minded. I mean, Nancy Pelosi is super smart and a really good woman. She's just doing her job in that lane, and it's a blood sport, right? Politics has become very brutal. So this idea of rather than concentrating on results, concentrating on each other and
on the theatrics.
Yeah, it's I think it's disorienting to everybody. So I don't think it's ill will. It was the system, but I think the world watching this is saying, "Come on, can we get some adults in the sandbox?" And maybe that's the benefit of it, is that people are tired of it, and now you can move on to something else. But as President of the United States, you're subject to a much higher level of scrutiny, and it comes with the territory.
When you think about what that means externally for the situation of the United States, when it comes to Russia, when it comes to China, certainly when it comes to what happens in this region right here in the Middle East, that kind of disruption, that ability to, frankly, take a unilateral decision, something we haven't seen potentially from former presidents, his predecessors. Has that been good for the United States? I mean, it's certainly shaken up the world.
I think it has been good. I think it has been good.
It was needed.
It was needed. As a participant, as a small, little, tiny participant, right, just as a merchant on the global stage, as I've watched it, I'm a great admirer of China. China's a centralist government. President Xi is emperor for life, basically. And they make decisions based on 30 or 40-year visions. As President of the United States, you're hardly given the liberty to make a decision based on 30-day decisions. So over time, the balance between China and America, and I think both politicians, economic students, and business people would all say that the pendulum swung too far for China.
So he was right to take a hard line.
I believe that he was right. Now, at the end of the day, we have to coexist with each other hand in glove. It's the only way the world can become better. And I think President Trump's style is to say, we'll get there, but unlike other presidents who say, let me lay a predicate of thoughtful concern over time and then we'll get to the call of the question, he calls the question early and then backdrops it. And tactically, that has worked in the interim. The question is, will it continue to work in the future?
Do we think we'll see a stage 2 for that trade deal? Will we see a conclusion of it prior to the election? I mean, what's your call there? I'm especially considering coronavirus has really pushed that conversation, at least for now, off the table.
Yeah, it's sad. It's a horrendous situation. I doubt whether they can get to it by the election, but I think phase 1 was sensational. And the team, when we talk about the president, the great thing about that particular trade deal was between Mnuchin and Lighthizer. The focus was really surgical. And I think the trust on both sides finally got there, as it did with Mexico and Canada. So he's got a lot of great talent and minds around him. And I think the world is learning in the midst of technological change on an instant basis, globalization, sustainability issues, all the dilemmas and the tribe and flags disputes that we're having everywhere. Getting agreement on anything is phenomenal.
When you look at China, taking a step back and thinking about what we're going to see over the next 10 to 20 to 30 years, it's been on the minds of most policymakers that I've spoken to for years now, a great concern about the fact that they seemed as if they were able to continue with a government which is somewhat authoritarian and at the same time have a thriving capitalist kind of economy. And that duality disturbed a lot of people in the West. Where do you see that headed today? Because the response to coronavirus has not been one that has strayed, frankly, too far from a Maoist playbook. They essentially told people who raised a red flag and said, we have a problem, that they weren't allowed to say that. There was repression. And as a result of that, you've seen this virus, unfortunately, taking a great toll on the Chinese people and even externally. When you take a step back and think about this in terms of the long term, how concerning is that to you?
Well, I mean, firstly, the coronavirus is a massive disaster for all of us. And anything that could be done to lessen the burden on them should be done. Now, that being said, China was never a subscriber to the Treaty of Westphalia. They're not an underwriter of the
democratic values
or nation states. And the Chinese over history the people themselves have not felt comfortable in that kind of environment. So this centralist power in which a couple billion people are now starting to undergo that welcome to reality incubation that technology and the digital revolution are bringing to them, right? No longer anywhere do we have the boundaries and the barriers to nation states. So it's a different evolution that everybody's dealing with. In this region, they've dealt with it unbelievably beautifully for an area that used to pride itself on boundaries on information, on censorship,
There's still censorship. Whether you look at the UAE or Egypt or Saudi Arabia, there is still censorship in this region.
Well, there is, but it's hard now, right? You with the 5 big technology companies who have really evaded those boundaries. So between Microsoft, Apple, Google, you look at the MENA region, 530 million people, 300 million or so devices. So the Internet of Things on the precipice, a family living in the desert who's now watching Instagram and Facebook, and that openness to another part of the world is...
Well, it forced a cultural change.
Right, and it's disorienting. I think China will go through the same issues, but at the end of the day, all systems are being challenged. If we look at Latin America,
this is a big failure for them in the sense that if you look at their model of capitalism, commie capitalism. This is a major failure when you have people dying in such large numbers, and you had a failure of the government to catch this early on. And that's as a direct result of, frankly, an old school way of thinking. What is the rethink that needs to happen for China in the wake of this disaster? Because, frankly, there doesn't seem to be any sign that they have a handle on this situation.
They've been to this party before. So as they're dealing with Hong Kong, as they've dealt with discontent in the past, they have a playbook for that. Whether that playbook works in the future is a question, but I think that's probably what they're fearful of, is too much power and you have a real problem, too little power and you have a bigger problem. So that balance, I have no idea how they're going to play it.
When you think about that in terms of your investment hat, how concerning is that to you?
I mean, tremendously concerning. I think not only in China but everywhere, the macro environment around which you invest, the transparency, the legal system, the consistency, the underlying values, has become everything. And anticipating that has become impossible. So just on a currency basis, if you think about China, if you look at the hospitality sector in the UAE, and everybody here was so excited about the fact that the Lunar Chinese New Year was coming, which should be the best 60 days of the season. Who could have ever anticipated coronavirus, which was going to stop the flow of people basically to that part of the world? All of the manufacturing aspects of what go on in China, just as everybody's starting to claw back after a trade deal and say maybe we can stay there. But it's the same all over the world. So I think part of the dilemma that business people are having, and part of the success of America is a transparent, understandable, predictable, reliable environment in which to do business. Europe, for the most part, has been too, but in many sectors and sessions. And without a fiscal and a monetary and political policy that is in one package, it too is very difficult to navigate. Latin America, impossible.
What about Japan, given what we've seen in the last year or so with Carlos Ghosn?
Look, Japan is a very complicated place, as we know, but an amazing economy with an incredible savings rate that is slowly atrophying into non-relevance.
Is there a moment when you see something like the trial, or the fact that they never actually got to trial, frankly, Carlos Ghosn, and think, that's just not somewhere where I'd want to put my money?
Sure, I think everybody envisions that. On the other hand, Japan has been a place where predictably you could do business as a foreigner within silos, knowing what those silos are, and be fine. We've had an office in Japan for 20 years. We've been successful because we've been respectful. We've been humble. We've applied ourselves in a Japanese method. When you don't do that, just as you would in any country, you're going to have a problem.
And he didn't do that?
I don't know. I don't think anybody knows exactly
and that's part of the problem.
What the facts are.
When you think about what's happening in this part of the world, you spend a lot of time out here, you've invested a lot in this region. You look at the power players, Mohammed bin Salman, Mohammed bin Zayed, Mohammed bin Rashid. Who do you think is leading the way as this region transforms?
Well, look, I think they're all leading, including Sheikh Tamim. You have young leadership. And just to back up for a minute, if you think of the history of the region, and you're one of the best historians on the region, and you're living the modern age, but Sykes-Picot was like the Westphalia Treaty, right? Sykes and Picot really had no idea of the tribes and flags that were here when they started to divide up after the war, what these sovereign nations would really be. And so the first realm of that was reliance by all of these tribes, basically on the West. So between France, Great Britain, and America, the colonialization for every place except Saudi Arabia, really, was subject to the will and desire of the West. And the first level of monarchies or leadership was really that. And I had the good fortune, way before you were born, of coming here as a finance lawyer, and I never imagined in my life that I would see what I'm seeing today. It was just unthinkable. But that Bedouin wisdom that they all had at the time, and the speed in 50 years of how this transitioned, was mind-boggling. So from a fossil fuel-based economy to a situation now in which fossil fuel is important but has to transition to something else.
How concerned are you when you look at a report like we've just seen from the IMF saying that the $2 trillion in wealth of this region, the GCC countries, is going to evaporate in not too distant future? Because we've been talking about this for a long time, about the need to diversify the economies in this part of the world, but they seem to have put a date on it. And when you think about what happens next out here, how concerned are you that they're not moving fast enough?
Well, I think we're all panicked that it is not moving fast enough, but I think they're moving as fast as they can move. I mean, the youth under 30 is 65% of the MENA population, and in Saudi Arabia alone, it's half the population under 21. I mean, this is a frightening thought. So unwrapping that, especially unwrapping the pieces for all of them, is really, really complex. But this new level of leadership, MBZ, MBS, Tamim, the divergence that they have amongst themselves is a regional issue. That's amongst them. And I disregard that because they'll solve it. They're all great men.
Do you think we're close to getting a resolution?
I do. I really do. And it's my great hope because we have to do that first. Right? The world, as you know, the world doesn't understand the word Arab because there's such divergence in every region, amongst every sect, amongst every religion, amongst every tribe. So the first thing we have to do is consolidate, and the GCC is a place that it has to happen. So my hope is that that happens quickly, and that the unwrapping of all of these countries at a time where if we don't give a hope certificate to the youth, and it's a big question in the U.S. because people in the U.S. say, why do we care? This is so far away. We don't need oil anymore. They have plenty of money. Let them figure it out on their own. But as you and I have discussed before, if you have 100 million youth that are unemployed with no education.
And it's a misperception that we have the oil and we don't need their oil anymore. I mean,
of course,
and it's one that the president continues to shine a light on. When you think about this in terms of young people, there's no doubt that here in the GCC they've had certain advantages as a result of being petrodollar economies. But at this point, we've got oil prices that have hit below 50 as a result of the coronavirus. There are a lot of concerns about whether or not the Russians will be on board for another round of cuts, if that's something that's even desirable. We talked about whether or not they're moving fast enough. But this also has implications for what happens in the rest of the region, particularly in a country like Lebanon. If they don't have a lot of petrodollars coming in, they can't pay workers who are living and sending money back home, that does impact that country's economy. And I want to ask you about that specifically. When you look at the situation in Lebanon today, a great deal of potential, but unfortunately, a great deal of economic turmoil. Is there a quick fix? Is there a solution that you see that could move them in the right direction today?
I wish I had a positive answer. And we had the good fortune last night of having 45 of the Lebanese diaspora, all successful men and women from every walk of life, addressing this problem. And I can tell you I got a 5 Tylenol headache.
How many hours were you there?
We were there from 6 o'clock probably to midnight. Brilliant, astute, emotional, balanced, and impossible. Impossible in addressing a situation that was born out of the sectarian division, right? Little Lebanon, which has no real economic importance within the region, was always the poster child of a civilization that could exist with Sunnis, Shias, Druze, Elwalites, Maronites, Jews, Greek Orthodox, side by side, in the middle of a very difficult neighborhood, and shine. When the French mandate ended and they elected to have a president who was Maronite, a prime minister that was Sunni, and a Speaker of the House, so to speak, who was Shia, they divided up the spoils, so to speak. And then the influx of Palestinian refugees and Syrian refugees. I mean, when you think of a country now that has a couple million refugees against 2 million self-population, that's governed by 3 distinct entities that over time have learned that their own survival has to be based on corruption, it's a sad story.
Is the confessional system broken?
Absolutely.
And no longer serves the country?
In my humble opinion, and I'm an immigrant on both places, it not only doesn't serve the country, it's going to tank the country unless they all get over it and say, this is over. We need a leader and we need to change tomorrow.
Is asking the international community for assistance a mistake? Because if you look at the history, various groups have been asking various nations and nation states and different actors, Hezbollah, to get them out of trouble before, to push the dial forward one way or another way.
I think the international community is just tired of hearing it. It's happened so many times, and I think people perceive the love of Lebanon and Lebanese on one hand, and the distaste for the process of what happens within Lebanon on the other hand.
Do you believe this current government is going to be able to move the dial forward, or are we going to have a total economic collapse?
I'm not smart enough to know, but I can tell you the consensus after spending time investigating, is there anything that we could do? Is there any way that those of us of Lebanese descent outside who've had a good fortune of having some international experience could help? And I think the answer is no. Is the current regime, Hezbollah, forgetting about the interpretation of what Hezbollah is for Israel or America or the terrorist international portion of that, inside of Lebanon is a political party that's doing a good job for their people. The Shias are coming in and out on one hand.
Is there a historic opportunity here, given the seeming success, at least momentarily, and the fall in oil prices and what's happening in China, which takes away a significant market for Iran when it comes to selling their oil? Is there a moment now to loosen Hezbollah's grip on the country? Because the current government couldn't have been put in place without the backing of Hezbollah.
I think that there's an opportunity with the deal of the century, right, which is very controversial, but in my opinion, brilliantly posed by the president and really the architecture that Jared had put in place. And people say, look, it's never going to happen. You're only bringing one party to the table. The Palestinians aren't at the table. That's true. And on the other hand, nobody's been able to get both parties to the table for half of a decade. And something has to happen. Something has to happen for Jordan. Something has to happen for the Palestinians. Something has to happen for Lebanon.
Is this their last best chance, the Palestinians, in your view?
I think so. I think it's an opportunity to make a deal. And it also falls back into your very good question of with Hezbollah, not necessarily to have Hezbollah withdraw. It's not that Hezbollah is a bad thing within Lebanon. It's all about Iran and the superpowers. And where does Hezbollah funding come from? Well, it comes from Iran, but it comes through Iraq. So America's done a great job of shutting down with sanctions the flow of money. But Iraq has another problem. Iraq is out of control, right? It's a country that's lost for itself. So I think that out of this quagmire of deal of the century, and all the Arab countries are very soft at putting their hands and embracing it or pushing it away. You see that they're revising, some of the Arab countries are revising their harsh language on the fact that they would not even consider what the president proposed. But it would be a good time for everybody to back channel and say, look, let's put this away for a while. This is an issue that doesn't need to be addressed in the way that we've addressed it before. And out of that could come a solution.
What's the anniversary of the Islamic Revolution? Did you see President Trump getting a photo op, if not potentially a deal with the Iranians?
I don't know that he thinks in photo ops. But look, it's a time in the world where if there were a soft set of hands on the reins, everybody would applaud it. And rather than forcing any of these very difficult issues into a corner from which they can't exit, if there's an opportunity to allow everybody to declare a victory, and I think you see everybody having back channels, and sometimes those back channels work much better than the front door. So whether it's a photo op or not, I think taking advantage of this Rubik's Cube starting to evolve itself into a solution might be a great thing.
And finally, because I'm being wrapped, when you think about what happens next for you, you will be departing as CEO, but continuing on as executive chairman, I believe, in 2021. What is the time that you're spending in the region today and globally? To what end, I should ask, is that time being spent? What can you do between now and then for Colony Capital that will potentially change the game? Because you've had a lot of pushback internally.
Yeah, we have, because look, nobody likes change, especially real estate is a slow-moving entity, and it's filled with physical, functional, and financial obsolescence. So Colony is a $60 billion huge public company in the usual food groups: hospitality, industrial, healthcare. Real estate is a little bit of Jurassic Park, because it needs customers, it needs consumers, it needs counterparties and credit. And in this technological world, it's all changing. So you see what's happening in retail, right? You probably have Amazon.com stacked up in your garage every day. We all do. Uber, Lyft, the Internet of Things, the onset of sensors and what's going to happen, and 5G and where it's moving. So real estate as people knew it is changing in every aspect. Airbnb versus hospitality and hotels. You just saw what happened with WeWork. Industrial, smart logistics and data centers, and the way things are housed and used is entirely different. So my job as a CEO is to go, where is it going to be in 10 years? We have infinite capital. So if the stock market votes with their feet every day, my job is to think 4 years from now, how am I going to beat my competitors, and who are my customers? Well, my customers are the 5 big tech companies. That's who the customers are. So if you look at Amazon, Apple, Microsoft, Facebook. They're spending $700 billion in CapEx, also in this part of the world. So devices today are 1.5 mobile devices per person, and the Internet of Things is speeding everything. But what do you need to speed up? You need infrastructure. Who supplies that infrastructure? To supply that infrastructure, you need data centers, you need radio cell towers, you need fiber optics. We bought a business, Digital Bridge, run by Mark Gansey, who'll be the CEO, which was the best in the business. Now the market looking at that shift isn't sure. They were renting our dividend. They say, well, we love this. Just keep paying us 8% on these physical, financial, and functional obsolescent assets, and we're fine. And I'm looking and saying, I think this market is topped. Everybody's searching for yield. We're going to move into a counterparty for the next 10 years. That's where we need to be, and it's a little bit painful in the process. So my job is to get that done, get the people who are much smarter than I in place, try and plan a vision on all the things that we're talking about to insulate them and have some boundaries and borders in a swim lane that will produce much greater residual value to those 5 logos over the next 10 years, because I think that's where the money's going to be. The Internet of Things is going to change the world.
When you look at tech valuations, though, what we've seen happening with Tesla, public investment fund divesting themselves of those assets ahead of Tesla's soaring, frankly, in the market. What's behind that, do you think?
What's behind why they got out, or what's behind the valuations?
Both.
Yeah, so owning stocks is very different than running a company. And I'm a horrible stock investor. I hope I'm a better CEO. But behind the investable capital is always going to the next play, right? So if you think about Tesla, is it about Tesla or is it about batteries? And if it's about batteries, is it about power? And what happens to power? So if we just talk about internet, if you take data centers today, just as they exist, occupy about 3% of the total electrical power in the world. Growing to about 10% in 4 or 5 years, just data centers. So power, at a time where we're going into sustainability, where we're saying we want 0 carbon footprint, and what we're relying on is greater bandwidth. Everybody wants more of everything, faster, quicker, and now we're not just sorting the data that we want. Hadoop and these systems that back up data for data that are now sorting through what they call exhaust data, right, with an algorithm. So on the stock side, people have their algorithm, they're analyzing what they want. But on the building a company side, if you look at Tesla, patents don't matter anymore. You build a software program in 3 months. And by the way, it becomes antiquated in 2 years. So to have a patent that takes you 3 years to get for a 20-year patent doesn't make any sense. So I think people are betting on the pieces of great companies that have great visionaries like Elon Musk. It's not based on a P&L. Right? I hate earnings calls. I'm the worst at earnings calls because I have 25-year-old analysts who are saying, how could you have missed it by 2 cents? I'm sitting here saying, dude, we're running a $60 billion company.
Is it the fact that they lack vision, do you think?
I think they're doing their job, right? What they're interested in is current yield and the discipline of financial acuity. The difficulty in these legacy businesses is they don't really lend themselves to that. So if you take real estate, for instance, the difference between technology and real estate, they don't worry about a P&L. They don't have to produce earnings. They have expectations. So they have eyeballs, they have subscribers, they're different. I said, please, just give me that for 1 year, I'll be the happiest guy in the world. With us, we have to produce FFO or core FFO. But in the meantime, you also have to allocate capital back to, if you look at this hotel will eat every ounce of cash flow you produce if you allowed it to put back into keep competitive with its rate. So everything is residual value.
If you apply that then to a situation like WeWork, for example, I mean, everything is clear in hindsight, right, 2020. Should the writing have been on the wall for that company?
Well, it was on the wall, right? We've all seen that before. It wasn't a novel idea. It was a novel concept, the way Adam portrayed it. And I don't think wrongfully, right? That millennials are going to work differently, that this has become a different environment. But think about what he took long-term liabilities and matched them with very, very short-term revenues. That is a really dangerous mechanism. So I think people at the beginning, especially people who had been in finance or real estate, were saying this is the opposite of what happened, because usually you build an office building. So the cycle is find a piece of land, take 2 years to find that piece of land, get it zoned, take another year to get it zoned, get a great architect, take a year to find an architect to design it, build it, that takes 2 years, lease it up takes 2 years. So from the idea that you had to having tenants is 7 years. The world's changed 17 times. So he went out and just sublet everybody else's space and said, I'm going to create an experience within that space that meets today. It just got ahead of itself. This short-term revenues with long-term liabilities always ends with the same bad chapter. So I'm not sure that that's over, by the way, but the valuations are ridiculous, insane. It's hope certificates, because whether it's CNBC or whether it's Colony Capital or whether it's you and I, we can only pay our bills on Friday morning with cash. It's the only way I measure success, is cash. Whatever the nomenclature is, whatever the belief is, whatever the hope certificate is something different. So I'm just not smart enough to understand the valuation mechanics. But when you look at what's happening in the world on the Internet of Things, or you look at 5G, or you look at what does it take to connect, it's the same thing. It's that kind of real estate, but fiber, so to put light through fiber in this part of the world, for instance, is such a monumental task. When you think of how do you actually have to dig up streets, you have to dig up desert, you have to line fiber, which no matter what you do in the interim, is going to be the dictator of how much data you can transfer and who's going to do that. So we're making a jump. I think it's the right vision. I think it's my job. My job is to define it, implement, set out a strategy, find the people that can do it, and then get the hell out of town. That's what I intend to do.
Huawei, dangerous?
Yeah. But needed, right? It's the idea of how do you protect highways or electricity or the flow of information is just another whole arena, and it's happening there. It's happening in the Internet of Things. It's also going to happen in space, right? The next thing, besides the Internet of Things, is going to move upward. But we don't have a defined space law. We don't have a defined protocol. We don't have an understanding of how do we play nicely in the sandbox with each other on any of these things. Or when we look at computers and we say, okay, transistors, right, Moore's law says transistors are going to double in speed every 18 to 24 months. Now they're saying Gordon Moore was wrong because they're doubling every 8 months. Mm. So if transistors double and you have better, faster chips and everybody's using those chips, the manufacturer of those chips ultimately is going to be the prevailing success. Because what happens now is every cell phone, you drive by a billboard, and a cell phone has a number which it's constantly sending out to find the internet. So you drive by the billboard, it doesn't matter if your phone is on, that billboard is saying, she's going home, she just came by, this is what she just bought, this is what she's interested in. That data now is being sorted someplace. Even the exhaust data, the data that they're not looking for. So privacy, the ownership of that information, the open sourcing of all of these items, it's a different world. And the protection of all of these monopolistic entities, including our own. I mean, Amazon, Apple, Google.
Do they worry you?
No.
Why?
Because I think we've gone to a different era, in my humble opinion. Right? These companies are on a path, just like open sourcing, to imagine that people would spend their life and their creativity. Right? I grew up in an archaic environment, which to create value you had to have an edge. You had to know something that somebody didn't, and you arbitraged that. So if you had a piece of knowledge or a relationship, and it's all about finance is about building relationships, there wasn't homogeneity of knowledge, there wasn't homogeneity of a stock exchange, there wasn't homogeneity of currency, there was no homogeneity of anything. So we could engineer around the edges, and I would never share with my competitor. The last thing I would do is call Steve Schwarzman at Blackstone and say, by the way, I just had a great idea, and I've got so much information that I want to give to you, because together we can better it. But that's what's happening. It's what's happening on open sourcing across all of these realms. So the monopolistic effect, scale, is the only thing that works here for all of them. And I think the nature of the kind of companies that they're building themselves become a digital nation state.
But those have to be regulated.
Well, they're almost self-regulated. When we say regulated for the purpose of what?
Well, Facebook, for example.
So Facebook is taking on regulation in a greater way than any country could ever take on regulation, right? So engineering at the edges, the market, I really believe the market itself will self-regulate those entities. If Facebook is doing something that its 3.5 billion users don't want, it's going to modulate and change. And just like it was with the phone company. Randall Stevens is one of the best CEOs ever in history. He's under a little pressure now. But what he did, if you remember, he made the first deal with Steve Jobs. He jumped out of, Ma Bell was like the most antique business you could ever imagine. And he reinvented himself by AT&T becoming out of kind of a monopolistic position. Now we're having the same thing in media, right? Is can those owners of broadband dictate who and what comes over it? So does it become like a utility? It becomes an electrical utility. That's a danger. It could. And so could those companies. And then we're through the same, right? We went through the same cycle. Phone companies became utilities for exactly the same fear. We busted them up, said, now you're free. The phone companies then became cable companies. The cable companies then become internet companies. And the internet companies become entertainment companies that buy studios, and it'll start all over again.
So we're a cycle of boom and bust, and tear it up and start again.
Yeah, I think so.
Tom, we're going to have to leave it there. Tom Barrack, thanks so much for joining CNBC.
Thanks. It was fun. Great being with you.